The silence kept Judith company as she continued to trespass. There was a rawness to closed places, an authenticity often hidden beneath the polish of scheduled open hours. She usually stole into the benighted aisles of closed grocery stores or the rotted guts of abandoned warehouses. The quiet of empty places was different. They spoke through the lips of settling floorboards or the slatted mouths of heating vents. All one need do is listen. The shadows were different too. They played across the pallid canvas of moonlit walls, their depths deeper than their fluorescently born daytime cousins. But here, in the infamous Tower of Teeth, all the hushed features Judith had come to enjoy felt predatory, hungry almost. It wasn't a surprise, of course. The place was a relic of the Great Darkness of 1999 and was built from over 4,000 feet of human teeth, and some not-so-human teeth, so the rumors go. Judith always wanted to visit it, but not the 9-to-5 domesticated version. Places like this weren't meant to be tamed. They couldn't be. That's why she knew its daytime compliance was a facade. A banal guise to lull the masses, all while it slowly fits its millions of teeth around the neck of the world. She haunted enough shuttered spaces to know a structure's true self lied behind no trespassing signs and poorly kempt wire fences. That was just the nature of things. Judith wandered the infamous tower for hours, the crunch of enamel beneath her soles never failing to cause her to wince. She traversed multiple yellowed staircases and loitered in strangely furnished rooms, all composed from a pearly myriad of incisors, canines, and molars. She felt like she was walking through the devil's mouth. It was exhilarating. The quiet was different in the tower, too. It wasn't passive like the other places she'd been. It was oppressive, like it had edges. She talked to herself aloud, hoping it might cushion the quiet's abrasiveness, but it just seemed to eat her words. Any other place of that size would have conducted her voice far into the other rooms, but there was no echo at all. It was as if her words were hapless little mice, too slow to outrun the predatory silence. She hoped her words were the only things it was hungry for. Judith continued her ascent until she spied, on the far side of the 18th floor, the dim outline of something. Its mystery attracted her. It was like seeing a cloth-covered shape in the back of an old attic, or the vague image of something just beyond the rush of a stream. She moved closer to it. Hints of its odd shape revealed itself even before she glimpsed the thing, as it cast a strange symmetry of shadows on the surrounding floors and walls. With it finally in full view, Judith could see that it was a sculpture of sorts, massive in stature and, like the rest of the tower, fully comprised of teeth. By all estimates, the thing seemed to be a large, winding tongue. It twisted, curved, and spiraled about the entire room. Along its length protruded enamel-carved jaws, each one fit with the motley of fangs that clearly had no home in any human's or even animal's mouth. Hesitantly, she reached out and touched it. It was warm, as if below its toothy skin coursed blood. Judith suddenly withdrew her hand. She thought she felt breath, moist and hot, slip from one of the open maws to her left. She shook her head a bit, trying to jar loose the crazy thought. There was no way the thing breathed on her. It couldn't have. She felt stupid for even entertaining the possibility. Despite the ridiculous notion, Judith leaned in closer to the mouth in question, practically daring it to exhale. It did. Judith froze. A porcelain doll now stood in her place, empty and fragile. The other world, which leaks only sparingly into our own through nightmares and other dark passageways, touched her. It was only natural of her to withdraw, to recoil from something so firmly alien, so definitively other. But she also felt compelled to know it, to trace the outlines of its mystery. It was this that brought pink life back into her briefly hollowed body. Curiosity replaced fear, and Judith moved closer to one of the open jaws. The warm breeze that slunk past her didn't faze her, nor did the stink that accompanied it. Instead, she was fixated on a sound. It was more like the ghost of a sound, really. She wasn't sure whether it emanated from somewhere beyond the throat she was staring down or the fear factory churning in her skull. But as she concentrated, straining her ears beyond the harsh silence, she was sure of it. It was coming from within the sculpture. It sounded like chewing. The noise continued to grow, shredding its ambiguity, and Judith could clearly hear the play of flesh tearing from the bone. Other sounds soon joined: gnashing teeth, feverish growls, and the groans of sated appetites. Her stomach churned, but she wasn't sure if it was from disgust or something else. Other mouths began to speak, each one delivering its own hungry song, until eventually the whole of the room was alive with the din of feasting beasts. Judith wanted to run, but she couldn't. It wasn't that her legs couldn't move, or even that the rigor of fear had returned and frozen her in place. It was her stomach. It was kin to the hunger, dancing to the ballad of invisible and gluttonous things. She felt like she was starving. A toothy black hole swirled inside her, hungry for whatever might happen into its orbit. She tried to think through it, hoping mind could prevail over matter. But even her thoughts were consumed, swallowed into a single ravenous desire. She couldn't take it anymore. A guttural scream broke loose from her lips, and before she knew it, she was running. Judith mindlessly descended floor after floor. She was moving so fast she barely noticed the walls were glistening, salivating. Hallways became slavering throats, drool dripping from the ceilings and walls. She rushed through a forest of the stuff, unhindered, strings of sputum attaching to her like eager tentacles, and then snapping into frothy swamps on the floor as she sped through. She barely noticed, though. Judith's mind had become a sharp and singular thing. It shed its so-called evolutions, whittling consciousness down into leaner, more pointed calculations. Motive disappeared into urge, and thoughts had become simple and sensate. Introspection was merely a window into craving, a single and ancient one. By the time Judith crashed out the exit doors of the tower, covered in layers of drivel, the aching void in her stomach demanded sustenance. She sped towards the neighboring woods, stripping her clothes off as she went. The fabric things only burdened her movement. Her run turned into a lope, and the resulting speed created a cool breeze that stung her skin as she entered the tree line. She barely knew what was happening by the time she fell upon a small rabbit, its body quickly succumbing to her frenzied teeth. Satisfaction was brief, however. Her stomach had become a sacrificial altar to some infinitely hungry thing, ever demanding supplication, and like all things brought to kneel, she had no choice but to obey. Soon her belly became a dumping ground for tiny animals, squirrels, mice, possums. Even insects and rocks made their way into her. She even snapped at the air, hoping to swallow the very breeze that cooled her. She would devour the world if she could, along with the stars and the black sea they all floated in. Night after night, Judith coursed through the forest like a rapacious wave, her gut a gateway to a greater insatiable appetite. It was only when she heard a strange noise somewhere beyond the thicket of trees in front of her that she paused. It was faint at first, merely the rumor of a sound, but as she trudged further, it became definitive, distinct. In fact, she'd come to realize that it wasn't a singular sound she was following, but many. Gnarls, caterwauls, and growls eventually besieged her ears, and soon the din of glutting creatures was all she could hear. It was like listening to all the hunger in the world, a savage disharmony of predator and prey, and it seemed to be speaking to her. Judith stalked the wilds in search of the calling thing, wading through tall underbrush and mazes of white oak. The bestial sounds were blaring by the time she came upon a small clearing, where an assortment of plants and wildflowers seemed to grow undisturbed. She looked around, desperate to trace the source of the calls. She moved west. The noises got louder. Finally, she saw something atop the night-splashed hill of a nearby glade. Her eyes narrowed. It was a coyote, but more importantly, it was the source of the sounds. Judith sprinted towards it, and human speed, fueled by an unnatural hunger, carried her across the distance. As if sensing a greater predator, the coyote tried to escape, but by the time it started its retreat, a rabid Judith was already upon it. She quickly wrestled the canine to the ground and, with an unprecedented and feral strength, unwrapped it like a wet red Christmas gift. But where she expected to find the organs of a once living thing, perhaps even still pumping the last of the host's vitality, she found nothingness. The animal's bowels were a void, a Stygian and infinite oblivion. It was completely empty, except for the sounds. The once discordant play of so many feeding mouths turned into a single resounding song. It was as if the tenantless dark was alive with the melody of some cosmic orchestra. Each note played an appetite sated, sounds of worlds screaming, of pouring seas slaking the thirst of terrible, unknowable things, combined to form a harrowing serenade, an invitation to a banquet with no end. Judith stared into the blackness. It seemed to undulate like some enormous contracting throat. It hungered for her. She spent much of her adult life searching for the solace of empty, raw places stripped of their imposed sheen and civility. But the abyss before her was unblemished by such pretenses. It was a place that not only shunned, but devoured artificiality. It was pure urge, unapologetic and unburdened by reason, a monolith. Judith knelt down on her hands and knees and crawled into the void. She joined her hunger with its and disappeared into the carnivorous nowhere. And somewhere, miles back in that notoriously hungry tower, a new set of teeth grew.